Have any of you paid attention to the Dragon Ball video game lore? Like, I know you've probably played the games, but have you actually paid attention to the stories? Because there are a bunch of different continuities and they're all insane. Dragon Ball has a ton of games. A lot of them just recap the main stories, and some introduce what-ifs of sorts, but many of them have their own original stories, going completely beyond the source material. Original characters, original forms, original arcs, you name it. And on top of that, completely original lore. I can't spend my time covering everything here about every game, but I want to talk about some of the more interesting or insane bits of video game lore I've come across. I have a collection here of some short stories about characters or just actual arcs themselves. So, let's go. Oh yeah, and obvious spoilers ahead if any of you actually care about that, but a lot of these are really old anyways. Let's start with one of the most popular Dragon Ball games right now, Dokkan Battle. It's one of the biggest and longest running Dragon Ball games, and unfortunately it's the one I play the most. It's been going for over 10 years because it makes a shit ton of money from everyone getting gambling addictions. Like, the whole point of the game is that you spend money to get PNGs of characters that you like.
Perfect.
But it also has a story mode. And I know most of you who play it probably skip through the story just for the missions. It's free Dragon Stones after all. But it's actually a pretty big story and it's still continuing to this day. The gist of the story is that Trunks travels through time and it causes a ton of problems. Particularly, villains from everywhere get dragged into the timeline he's in. Trunks wishes for an ally, which is actually the player, so in a sense, collecting and summoning other characters in Dokkan is basically you getting more allies to fight all these opponents with. This creates some strange alliances, such as Z Broly and Trunks teaming up alongside the Z Fighters, Paragus, Nappa, and Raditz. Yeah, all those characters fighting together. And that was like one of the more recent parts of the story. On top of that, another recent team up that's happened is Bardock and Goten fighting against Cooler, who had teamed up with Frieza. And just like every Dragon Ball game ever, it glazes Bardock a ton. Like, Sorbet even tries to kill Bardock at one point, like the time he lasered Goku in Resurrection F, but Bardock reacts quick enough to deflect it. Not really an important plot point, but just kind of a funny one there. But you're basically just going around randomly fighting a bunch of these villains. Some of the major villains include Android 13, Dr. Cochin and Jiro, Cell, Boo, the Ginyu Force, as well as Cooler's Squadron. It's basically throwing together every villain possible. The story's lore isn't really too crazy itself, it's just like a fever dream of easy content. It's like a bad what-if, if anything. You'll also come to see that time travel shenanigans are a pretty common theme in Dragon Ball video game lore. It's going to get progressively weirder as we dive deeper. There is also another big Dragon Ball gacha game with its own story that has way more elements to it. I'm sure you already know what I'm referring to, it's Dragon Ball Legends. Dragon Ball Legends is another gacha game for mobile devices. It's probably most notable for its PvP, which I think is ass by the way, and I swear I'm not bad at it, it's just really annoying.
It's futile!
My personal gripes aside though, it also has its own story mode that has way more effort than what Dokkan has, as well as having a bunch of original characters, and the story is shockingly very enjoyable. Unlike Dokkan, which just throws you into random fights, this story actually has, well, story elements. Dokkan's is very surface level, but this one is actually trying to be its own thing. Bonus points for it having its own original lore too, as well as a bunch of its own original characters. It really helps to make the story stand out. The story surrounds something called the Tournament of Time, and in short, it's a tournament where various warriors are taken from various timelines to find who's the strongest of all time. Like I said, timeline shenanigans are commonplace in these games. It does have its own random fights to pad out the content, but it does have a legit story along with it. For a mobile game, the lore is actually somewhat deep and pretty cool. The main character is an ancient Saiyan named Shallot, who is actually descended from the original Super Saiyan god. You can even see it in his design. He has older Saiyan armor, kinda like what Cabba has, and how Vegeta commented that Saiyans used to dress like that a while ago. He also has a twin brother named Giblet, who starts off as one of the villains of the story, obviously also being a descendant of the original Super Saiyan god. The main antagonist is a guy named Zaha, who originally was an ally. It suggested he may be a demon, but the most important part of where he's from is that he's from a place that got destroyed while the gods did nothing to help. It's sorta implied that he's actually from one of the Xenoverse's Xenoverse. It's not explicitly confirmed, but I wouldn't be surprised if that actually is confirmed at some point. His whole backstory makes it sound like he's from a universe that Xeno erased. He basically arranged everything. He erased the memories of Shallot and turned Giblet against him. He implanted crystals in both of them, and somehow by fighting each other, these crystals get charged. What's the point of these crystals though? Well, once they get charged and merged together, it creates something called an Omnificence Crystal. This crystal is actually the prototype of the Super Dragon Balls, allowing him to wish for basically whatever he wants as long as the crystal is charged. Like, one wish he granted was for everyone to forget who Shallot was and assume he's evil by default, so even when he meets new people, they just assume he's evil. Or, he's used this to defend himself against Beerus' attacks and even copy them as well. Yeah, Beerus is against him too here because Zaha actually kidnapped Shin and is revolting against all of the gods. He's like a reverse Zamasu in a way, and sort of similar to another character we'll get to later on. But across the story, Shallot becomes allies with a bunch of previous known characters in Dragon Ball. For example, he was mentored by Nappa at one point, and Cabba's actually kind of a student of his. They fought against Cell together. And another good example of how weird the timeline shenanigans are is when Shallot gets the Super Saiyan God form. In the ritual, he has Goku, Cabba, Caulifla, future Trunks, the young version of him, and the Cell Games version of Gohan. And also, two of his closest allies are Jocko and Bulma from the very beginning of the series. Like I said, I'm not going to go over every story element in depth here, but honestly, as much as I hate the multiplayer in Dragon Ball Legends, the story's pretty cool. It's a free game too, so if you haven't played it or just haven't paid attention to the story, it's pretty long, but it's worth it, and it's still ongoing to this day. Now let's go to a game that's a little more niche, Dragon Ball Fusions. This is a 3DS game focused on, well, fusions obviously. A wish to Shenron caused a bunch of strong warriors to gather together in something called a time-space tournament. Wait a second, isn't that literally just the plot of Dokken and Legends combined? Oh god, all these games are just going to copy each other's plots, aren't they? Anyways, the story of this game itself isn't too important. I'm rather focused on the really weird things it introduces. It is fully focused on fusion after all, so a new type of fusion is introduced. There's a device called Metamo Rings, invented by Bulma, creating something called EX Fusion. It requires the two fusees to have a relationship, but they could be used by anyone, whenever. It's kind of like Patara, but with more flexibility for the time. You have to wear the fusion rings, then perform the fusion dance, but with the rings on you, it won't ever create a failed fusion, and there's no time limit. You can keep it on as long as you want, and then whenever you take the rings off, that's when the fusion's undone. Although it is a little bit weaker than Patara Fusion and Metamoran Fusion. This makes it way easier for people to fuse who have size differences, for example. One of the other crazier things introduced is the Ultra Fusions. It's a fusion method invented by the Xenoverse of all people, allowing 5 people to fuse into one. Yes, 5 people fuse into one. This game basically lets you merge anyone together, and with the 5-way fusion, it creates some pretty powerful but pretty weird looking results. One other tidbit I love about this game is another invention of Bulma's, Mecha Goku. Vegeta wanted a good training partner, so Bulma helps out by making one, and having him look like Goku in the process. Even she knows how obsessed Vegeta is with Goku. Now he has a fake Goku to fight. He could even transform into a golden form called Super Mecha, which is his version of Super Saiyan, obviously. But that's enough about that game. Now let's go to one that's a little bit older, and one that isn't really covered too often, Dragon Ball Online. This is an old MMORPG that is now defunct, and did have some involvement from Toriyama, mainly including the art. The story goes way beyond the original manga, set over 200 years after the Peaceful World saga. You might already know the Time Patrol, which appears in various Dragon Ball games, and Dragon Ball Online kinda helped to start that. It goes like this: Trunks wasn't supposed to time travel, and that had consequences. Go figure. So, to make up for it, he enlists under the Supreme Kai of Time, Kronoa, to stop other threats in the timelines. In case you don't know who she is, well, the title's pretty self-explanatory. She's basically the god of time. She oversees everything involving time. This game also introduced 2 particularly big villains. First, Mira, whose goal was to become the strongest. He's basically like Cell on crack, a bio-android from the demon realm with various other people in his DNA. But in this game, he primarily seeks Goku's DNA. In order to get it, he illegally time travels a bunch. It also introduces Towa, who you probably know as well. She was basically a Rinsu before Rinsu existed, if you don't know who she is. She's a scientist from the demon realm, in the future, who created various warriors like Mira and eventually Fu. Oh yeah, and her brother is Dabra. These 2 characters are both pretty well known now, thanks to Xenoverse and Heroes, and also they appear in Kakarot, but online is where they originate from. In the story, many people on Earth are now familiar with Ki because Gohan actually published his studies on it as a book. Funny enough, it seems like he doesn't study bugs in this story. But now, Ki is a pretty commonplace thing here. Everyone knows about it and how to access it because of this book. One of my favorite bits of info in Dragon Ball Online is the fate of Goku and Vegeta. Obviously, this story is set way after they should have died. There's no way they could have lived that long, at least based on the original story. At some point, the 2 of them realized that the rapid aging was about to take effect on them. And the 2 love fighting, obviously, so that's going to affect that. So instead of dying normally, they decided to go out with a bang. Quite literally, the 2 went out into space for a final battle and never returned. No one knows what truly happened to them, but there was a supernova very far away from where they were at. Presumably, this final battle was a deathmatch, with both of the Saiyans dying in a literal blaze of glory. A very fitting end for the both of them. Speaking of this game introducing a lot of the things from the Demon Realm, let's go over to Xenoverse because that kind of continues that. A lot of the big Dragon Ball games are very loosely connected, and that mainly includes a lot of the plots involving the Demon Realm and the characters from there. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the Xenoverse games already, but just like the other games so far, the plot involves, you guessed it, time travel shenanigans with demons. I don't know why it's always this, but it's always this. Actually, the plot is really similar to Dragon Ball Online. Towa and Mira mess with the timelines again, and the player acts as a time patroller going through time to stop anomalies. I don't really want to cover Xenoverse's story here, especially because a lot of people already know it, but rather I want to cover a character that it introduced, Demigra. Now, if you're not involved in any of the Dragon Ball video games, you don't know who he is, but he's one of the biggest characters there. And when we cover his history, you'll know why. He also later becomes a major character in Heroes, but he was originally a magician who wanted to become the Supreme Kai of Time. This was tens of millions of years ago. And his competition was Kronoa, who was eventually chosen as such, obviously. Another candidate was Mekhi-Kabra, who later ended up in the Demon Realm and then became the Dark King there, which is the highest level of power. Maybe something Goma should have aimed for, but he created what is called the Dark Empire, aka the Time Breakers. Back to Demigra, he eventually started messing with time. He got banished to the Demon Realm, became part of the Dark Empire, tried to desert the group, and then later escaped the Demon Realm, trying to mess with time again and then getting stopped by Cronoa. And because of that, he got trapped in something called the Crack of Time. The Crack of Time is essentially a void in time and space, and he got stuck there for 75 million years. No wonder this dude's insane. But eventually he gets free, and wanting to copy every other video game villain so far, he wants to mess with time and recreate the universe. He continuously reappears within the story of the video games. And in short, he eventually gets something called the Dark Factor, which is a form of life energy allowing him to become the Dark King, which both grants him a lot of power and authority. At his peak as the Dark King, he was able to get a box that stored a bunch of scrolls of eternity, which in simplest terms are basically scrolls that keep track of all the timelines. Essentially, a physical incarnation of all of history itself. And he absorbed the power of all those histories, basically now having the power of all these timelines. And it granted him a new time power unleashed form. Although, he was defeated by a combination of Ultra Instinct Goku, a boosted alternate Super Saiyan 2 Future Gohan, and Super Saiyan 3 Xeno Bardock. That was a very brief overview of his story. His story actually has so much to it that I can make a whole video just on him. But that's way beyond Xenoverse. We're into Heroes territory now, so let's actually cover Heroes for a bit. I've already made a few videos about Dragon Ball Heroes and Super Dragon Ball Heroes, and I plan to make more. For reference, if I continued making more Dragon Ball Heroes content, my channel would probably have endless content. That game encompasses the entire original story, plus the movies, plus GT, and Super, and then a bunch of other original timelines involved in it too. I'm also not ashamed to admit I actually do like Heroes as well. If you're interested in more Dragon Ball Heroes content, please let me know because it seems like you guys do like it. But let's cover some interesting tidbits. I won't go too deep here, I'll just cover some things people might not know about the story already. Like, for one, did you know Mr. Satan is a literal god? Well, kinda. In Heroes, there's a Universe 6 version of him that's stronger than even Xeno, Goku, and Vegeta. By the way, those two are cracked beyond belief if you ever got into the power scaling for the series. They make the mainline Goku and Vegeta look like frauds. Anyways, what happened was Silas, one of the main antagonists, he messed up the history of Universe 6 and created this version of him. Yeah, another antagonist messing up history. Great. This version of Mr. Satan is next in line to become the god of destruction, but strangely enough, he still can't fly despite his strength. By the way, who is Silas? To most of you, he might be a relatively unknown character, especially because you don't see much of him anymore. Millions of years ago, he was in the Galactic Patrol, and he eventually joined Cronoa to become the first Time Patroller. Despite being a villain, his motives are actually pretty interesting. He wasn't fond of the Time Patrol due to witnessing so many innocents having to die in order for history to proceed as planned. So, in order to completely wipe out evil, he destroyed a Scroll of Eternity, essentially eradicating a timeline and literally erasing history to make a new one. Of course, that was very frowned upon. So, Cronoa punished him by trapping him in a place called the Time Abyss. Yeah, she loves sealing people away in insane prisons. Anyways, he still wants to create a world completely filled with peace. So, he finds a way to escape. Partially because he created his own artificial ally named Oms. Silas and Oms then travel around, and Oms is able to absorb the power of some villains. First, Frieza and Cell, and then Hit and Goku Black. And then finally, the two of them merge together. But even with all that power, he's eventually defeated. Another pretty interesting character is Hearts, who is more well known, mainly because his fight was animated really well in the anime. But I've noticed a lot of people don't actually know what his story's like. He's like a reverse Zamasu, wanting to destroy all the gods in order to free the mortals. Part of this is due to Xeno erasing universes, which obviously shows how he has way too much power. So in a way, he's kind of similar to Silas, and Zaha in a way. Even though his conquest meant he had to kill a bunch of mortals in the process, he was focused on the end goal, and his eyes, no matter what it took, he wanted the remaining mortals to be free. Everything was a means to an end with him. He even teamed up with Fuse Zamasu, and didn't hesitate to get rid of him after he no longer needed the help. So right there is another similarity with Zamasu, his hypocrisy, killing mortals and teaming up with gods to accomplish his plans. But ultimately to do this, he had to get a hold of something called the Universe Seed, which can eventually turn into something called the Universe Tree and form an entire new universe. By getting the seed for himself, Hearts uses it to power himself up, hoping to use it to defeat Xeno. He was eventually defeated by Gogeta though, but the seed was eventually recovered and then used to grow a Universe Tree, which absorbed power from all the other universes. And this tree was later utilized by Fu and even Goku to power themselves up. Inadvertently, Hearts ended up creating the strongest version of Goku ever. This is a Goku that went through the events of Dragon Ball Super, as well as some of the Dragon Ball Z movies and even some manga events. Which is really weird, but as I've covered in a few of my recent videos, Dragon Ball timelines are weird like that anyways. It's barely surprising. Anyways, this Goku was fighting Fu, and took some power from the Universe Tree to actually fight him. This Goku is pretty comfortably the strongest version of Goku to ever exist. I did make a video about the weird Dragon Ball Heroes form, so you could check that out for more. There's way more interesting tidbits of lore too, like Goku Black getting a mask from Fu, and then killing 99 alternate Gokus for experience. Or Raditz getting Super Saiyan 3 by just getting lost in space and somehow getting stronger because of it. But I don't want this video to be all Dragon Ball Heroes, so we'll leave that off here and I'll make another lore video at some point. Everything ties into Dragon Ball Heroes anyways, so I might as well. Wow, I'm coming to realize all these games basically have the same plot. Some demon-looking dude messes with time and makes everyone fight. I mean, hey, it makes for an easy explanation as to why you're fighting all these bosses from different time periods, and why they're all strong enough to even contend with you. But still, it's funny that every villain basically has the same idea. Anyways, let me know what you think below. What were your favorite bits of lore from this video? And because there's a ton of stuff I didn't address, what's your favorite that didn't appear in this video if you know one? As usual, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.